When I go to do a seminar, one of the things that I always do is before I get up to speak, first of all, I believe everybody is similar. I believe not only has everybody got something that I can learn from or I can respect, but that we all have some similarities if we look for them. And I think you'll find those similarities if you ask yourself the question, how is this person like me? Or what's unique about this person? What do I respect about this person? And with a group of people, it's a little tougher. So you have to generalize, but I do that. If I'm going up, for example, to Canada and I'm going to speak, let's say in Montreal, before I got up to speak, I thought, well, what do I love about the French culture? What do I love about these types of people? And then I get a sincere, real answer. And then when I communicate it, it's real for me rather than just coming up with something false. If I go, for example, to Boston, I talk to people there and I see this intensity trying to get to the seminar and people in their cars. And I say, I love you people because you guys are intense.
Yeah.
I mean, that intensity can be intense in the car, but I like that. Go for it. When I communicate something, I can communicate it directly to you. When I go to Atlanta, I say, what I love here is the Southern hospitality. And those are sincere because I have those real feelings. So I think that what's important for people to think about is that there is something there, but you have to focus on it. And the way to focus on it is ask yourself the question, what do I like about this person? What do I respect about them?
Spoken like a genuine detective of influence, Tony. And by the way, I love that tie that you're wearing.
Oh, no. Listen to this manipulator. Tell you what, I'd like to give it to you. And later on, I'll come back and talk to you about something else that I like. Let's talk about another topic here. Let's talk about social proof. One of the things I see happens throughout our culture on a regular basis is I see people making decisions, and they'll justify the decision by saying, well, everybody else does this, or they'll justify the decision by saying, well, so-and-so said that this is right. They really have never investigated what that decision means to their life, whether it's really an intelligent decision. I'm curious if you could amplify a little bit on what is social proof and how does it influence us day to day?
Well, the way I like to describe it is that it has to do with one of the ways that we use to decide what is correct behavior for ourselves. And it is to look around us at the people who are similar to us, people who are like us. If a lot of people are moving in a particular direction, and if we see ourselves as like those people, then we see that as evidence for what is appropriate behavior for us to be taking in that situation. So if I can provide you evidence that people who are at your age level and at your income level and at your level of education and your standing in the community are making these kinds of steps in the direction of community responsibility or investment in the youth of the culture, whatever it is, this is what people like you have decided is correct for them. That's a good piece of evidence for all of us to use to decide, well, I can probably take that step too, and chances are it'll be a correct step for me.
So an example might be in the 80s we had We Are the World, and we had people that we respected or entertainers that were well liked. We have a combination of these principles, I guess, saying, hey, I want to take a stand, I want to make a difference in the world. And other people saying, gosh, if they're doing it, I want to do it as well. Just as they did in the 60s with drugs. Well, if they're doing it, I want to do it as well.
Yeah, and now, if we see in the 90s, we see the advertisers are moving away from having celebrities as spokespeople for their products. It's the average man on the street.
Oh, even more social proof.
Yeah, just like me, these people are using this and so on. And that is another version of influence.
So my understanding of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when people are in a position where they're not sure what to do, this becomes amplified. In other words, what other people are doing doesn't influence me as much as when I'm not sure. And when I'm not sure what to do, I look for references, and I look around and see what everybody else is doing. And well, if everybody else like me is doing this, well, maybe that's the right thing to do. Is that correct?
Correct. Especially when you are uncertain, you look around yourself for evidence of what you should do, because if you look inside, all you see is uncertainty.
Right.
So you've got to look outside for that evidence. But you don't want to just look at anything outside. You're still looking for evidence of how you should behave.
Right. So you look for people like yourself.
So you look for people like you. Very perceptive again.
Well, let me ask you a question. I remember a story you shared at one time in a conversation we had about, I think it was on a university campus where they did research where a woman was yelling saying she was being raped or making some sounds like she was being raped from behind a bush. Am I paraphrasing accurately? And
yes.
And it was a setup. And the reality is people did not respond to help her. Do you remember that story?
Yes, it's a study that was done where the researchers had people walking by acting as if there was nothing wrong.
Oh, so they rehearsed this.
Yes. So they had somebody acting as if there was a disaster, that there was an emergency, and other people just walking by acting as if there was nothing wrong. And then the true subjects in this experiment came into the situation, they took a look at it, and they decided there must be nothing wrong here. There must be no reason for me to take action. Look, these other people are walking by as if it isn't an emergency. They began to define the situation as some non-emergency, just some people horsing around in the bushes, yelling and joking.
Right.
And they walked right by what could have been a potential disaster.
That's also been done. I remember reading research years ago where they did this with people where they have 3 people walking by a sidewalk and having smoke coming out from under a door. 2 of those people are setups.
Right.
And they are taught and told, ignore the smoke, act like nothing's happening. The person in the middle doesn't know. They start to freak out. They start to say, there's a fire, there's a fire. And the person just looks at them, shakes their shoulders, and keeps on walking by. And that person who's kind of concerned looks for a moment, a little disturbed, and then ends up walking by also.
Walks right by. But if that person came by singly,
That's right.
then they would have gone and looked to see what was wrong and gone for help.
Because they would have to make the decision on their own.
Right.
And there's no other reference.
So when you're uncertain, you look around at the people who are similar to you. If they're not acting, you don't act. If they are acting, you follow their lead.
So that's how we can get people to wear neon shorts, huh? Everybody else is doing that, so I will as well, huh? What about, I remember years ago, and I think you referenced this in your book, if I recall, I believe it's called the Genovese incident. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yes.
Where the woman in New York City, who became pretty infamous at the time, who was, I guess, stabbed and raped for hours and screamed, and many people heard her and no one came to help. How do you relate that to this principle?
Similar principle. These were people who were looking down from their windows. It was very late at night, 2 in the morning, very dark on the street. They heard a commotion, they heard screams, they heard calls for help, but they weren't quite sure what that was. Is this a marital spat? Is this some teenagers horsing around? What is it down there on the street? They couldn't quite see what it was. 38 people surrounding this street where this woman was attacked 3 times, finally stabbed and killed. Not a single one lifted a finger to help. And by helping, I don't mean rushing down onto the street and hurling themselves between the victim and the knife. They didn't even call the police. Why? Well, they looked around and they saw all these people looking out the window. They said to themselves, number one, well, if there is something wrong, somebody else would have already helped. Right? It's not my responsibility.
What a deadly belief to have.
Yeah. It's not my responsibility. Here's people not taking personal responsibility, shouldering that to somebody else.
Right.
But they also saw these people standing at their windows, not looking to take action. And so they defined the situation as not requiring action, and a woman was killed.
Wow. I know one of my concerns that I see happening in our society is that you get around someone and whoever you hang out with, you become like. And it has to do with, I think, all these principles. You like the person and you want to be like them. You make a small commitment. Maybe you don't like something they do, but you don't want to make them wrong. So you make it okay for them to do this thing, whether it be smoking or stealing or whatever the case may be, no matter how extreme. You make it okay because you don't want to make your friend wrong. But as you make it okay for them, it's less of a problem for you to do it. And the commitment and consistency takes over. I think the contrast of, well, they're not killing somebody, or, well, gosh, people say I smoke, but I don't drink, or vice versa, or whatever the case may be. All those factors come into play. And where they become intensified is not just with a one-on-one relationship, but when someone gets involved in a cult. When someone gets involved, sometimes people say to me, well, Tony, you're a guru. And I say, no. I'm teaching people to make decisions for themselves. I don't want people to be dependent upon me. I'm not trying to create that environment. But there are environments where people are benefiting by making people dependent upon them, 100% dependent, not as a coach, not as a supporter or a person of giving information, but dependent. Yeah. And they seem to use all these principles. And I know you shared an example that fascinated me about an organization where they thought a UFO was going to be landed, and they took real intelligent people who normally would have said, well, anything's possible, but I need more evidence, and got them to just buy in without any evidence whatsoever to this concept and give up their homes and so forth. Can you relate that story?
Yes, it's a fascinating story. It happened in Chicago a couple of decades ago now. There was a small group called the Believers Group, living in a suburb of Chicago, in which one of their number started receiving messages from outer space about the upcoming end of the world. The world was going to end in an apocalyptic flood, according to these messages.
And since people have social proof from things like the Bible,
Right.
they say, well, that's really possible.
Yes, and they started to talk about it within themselves, and they started to convince themselves that this was the truth. And then other people started coming in because they saw that here was a group of people in their very neighborhood who was believing these things just like them, and they started to get new people coming in. Well, a couple of researchers from the University of Minnesota at the time heard about this, and they actually infiltrated this group, and we've got this beautiful record of what went on, the psychological dynamics of a group like this that was expecting the end of the world. It was fascinating. The book is called When Prophecy Fails, and I recommend it to any of your listeners. Absolutely fascinating study of the psychology of one of these groups. In any event, these researchers were in there. They were able to document what happened, and the group just convinced itself out of social proof. They only spoke to one another. They didn't speak to people outside of the group. This is another thing that the cults do. They try to cut off your allegiances. They try to cut off your connections to anyone outside of the group, so that the only proof that you can get is social proof from within the group that they can manage. Right? The day came for the end of the world, of course, because we're all
before
sitting
that
here.
happened, didn't they like sell their homes or give their homes away? And
Yes, I mean, to show their devotion to the beliefs, they would take steps like quit their jobs, give away all of their worldly possessions, sell their homes and give all the money to charity and so on, because they were so convinced by the social proof of the situation.
that also
they were
committed
right.
them, so they couldn't go back.
That's right. Every step they took another step. And because another person like them did something, right? Somebody just like me did it, that means I should do this sort of thing too. And so they sold their homes and so on.
And a lot of them also had like their doctor or people who they consider to be non-believers, so to speak, people who wouldn't just jump at something like this. When they saw them doing it, they said, gosh, this must be real.
Right.
So more and more
Look at this commitment. Look at this commitment.
So now I'm totally committed, and the appointed hour when it's all supposed to happen came, and
not a drop. It didn't even drizzle that day.
So what did they do? How did they deal with that inside their head? Now they've got their lives. They
Right.
in front of all their friends, they've committed and told their friends that if they don't do this, they're going to die, and they've sold their home, and they've given up their money. I mean, that's a lot of pain to turn back to those people and say, hey, I was wrong.
Exactly. They couldn't turn back. They had given too much. The world showed them their beliefs were wrong. The physical world showed them their beliefs were wrong. They had to resort to the only other source of truth that they had available to them, and that was social proof. They fanned out and tried to win converts to their belief system, right in the face of the fact that they had been shown to be wrong in terms of the physical evidence. Now was the time to create social evidence.
And I think the way, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't the way they did that, the person who was doing the channeling said they got a message that they're coming together and their commitment had saved the world?
That's right. Because they had shown so much light, because they had shown so much faith, God had decided to spare the world and not to end it. And so they went out with this message to try to win new converts, because they needed to believe. And the way you can believe stronger is to get other people to believe what you believe. The more people who believe what I believe, the more true it is. Convince, and ye shall be convinced.
Interesting. Well, also, if I can get other people to believe what I believe, then I'm not so stupid. If I go out there and I can convince other people to believe in this thing, then maybe by selling my house, maybe I didn't mess up.
Maybe I'm not so stupid.
Yeah, interesting. You know, I remember a study that I think also you quote that I read years ago that talked about how small commitments get enlarged, but also how the physical act of making it public plays such a role in whether we really follow through on our commitments. And I think one that you referenced is one where people were asked to measure, I think, the length of two different lines, and as a result, some were asked to write that information down and some were not, and what the difference was. Would you amplify on that?
Yeah, it's a classic experiment in psychology. People were asked to estimate the lengths of certain lines and make some decisions based on their perception of things. And one group of them was asked just to keep those decisions in their heads. Another group was asked to write them down just for a moment on these magic marker kind of slates. You know, they have the cellophane where you zip up the top and away goes what you've written.
Right.
I had them as a kid. And the third group was asked not just to write them down and commit themselves actively, but to show their answers to the other people in the room. Now, all of the groups of people got some information to indicate that their choices were wrong. They had made the wrong choices. And the experimenter said, we're going to give you another chance to estimate once again the lengths of those lines. And he looked to see who changed from their initial decisions.
Or who just stuck by what their first impression was.
Right, or who stayed loyal to their initial positions, which were, by the way, the right ones. This information that they got was actually false information that their initial position might be wrong. So who sticks to their guns with the correct initial decisions? Those people who just made those decisions and kept them in their heads, they moved away from those initial positions. Those people who wrote down their decisions just for a moment and then zipped them away, they stayed more solid to their initial commitments. But those people who made those commitments and showed them publicly, they were the most adamant, they were the most loyal, they were the most solid in staying with what they had initially committed to. So if we're in a position, I've found this sometimes, I think I've committed somebody, I think I've changed somebody to my way of thinking, and I come back a little later, they're right back where they started from. And I used to think to myself, I guess I didn't really change them. I guess I was wrong. Now I think differently. It's not that I didn't change them. I didn't make them solidify the commitment. I didn't make them solidify the change. And when I do that, now the behavior is going to last into the future, and I can assure myself that the positive change I've produced at time 1 will still be there at time 2 when I want to call on it.
Which is really, I think, what we all want to do with ourselves. And we want change to last. And one of the biggest challenges that people have who don't know this type of technology is they go and make a change and they stop smoking or drinking, or they make a shift in some of their poor behaviors, and then it ends up going right back. And they have not really used the power of commitment in an effective way on themselves. They haven't got enough leverage. So it's an important thing if we want to make change last in ourselves to use all of these principles.
Right.
That makes sense. You know, a good example of social proof, I think, unfortunately, is what happened in Guyana years ago with Jim Jones. Maybe you could share a little bit of your view about how that came about and how these principles related to getting people to actually kill themselves, commit suicide.
Yes, the ultimate compliance with a request. I mean, here was this leader, Jim Jones, stood up and called out for the mass suicide of this group, a kind of action that's unheard of in human history, virtually. How could he have done it? Well, I think one of the principal reasons that he held such sway over his group is that he moved them from their familiar circumstances in San Francisco, where the People's Temple was originally developed, down into this strange environment in equatorial Guyana, South America. Nothing was familiar to them. Everything was uncertain. And remember what we were saying earlier, it's when people are uncertain that they're most likely to look around them at people who are similar to them. Well, in Guyana, nobody is similar to you except the other members of the People's Temple. And so now, when Jim Jones makes his call, and a few people, there will always be a few people in any strong leader-dominated group who will respond automatically to whatever the leader says. When these people start moving in the direction of that poison vat of Kool-Aid, the social proof is now there to convince the other people that this is what they should do. Not only is their leader saying they should do this, but the people just like them are making that kind of movement, making that kind of statement that this is what's appropriate, and you find them all acting in a similar way.
And even more scary, many of them went and fed this Kool-Aid to their children. which
Yes.
is the ultimate. I mean, if this person who they respected, who was their friend, is not only willing to do it themselves, but they're willing to give it to their children for this higher cause.
Right.
And they all murder themselves. Unbelievable.
Yeah, we talked earlier about reciprocity being the most pervasive of all of the principles. I think social proof is the most powerful.
Really?
Yeah.
You see that cross-culturally?
I see it able to get people to do things that under other circumstances they simply would not be willing to do.
Amazing. Well, it's something we need to be aware of so that we're not influenced in a way that causes us to do things that are not consistent with our highest desires and needs as human beings. And it's also something, though, that's real important. In our society today, for example, alcohol is not something that is looked at like cigarettes. Cigarettes have changed over the last 10 or 15 years, 20 years. We've changed socially what it means to smoke for a lot of people. And some people are obnoxious about it, but the good news is that a lot of people will become healthier, especially when 1 out of 3 people die of cancer, and so much is related to cigarette smoking. But it's interesting to see alcohol has not hit that level yet.
Yeah.
It's beginning to change a little bit, but drinking alcohol for a lot of people, if they go out and they don't drink alcohol, in the last 10 years, it's begun to change. But previous, it was like, you don't drink alcohol, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Because the social proof was so intense. Everyone else is doing it. Therefore, if you're not, it's not just you're not doing the right thing, it's that you're wrong.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how that changes within a culture. What do you perceive has made that happen around cigarettes? And do you see it happening with other drugs, cocaine, other things like that in the future?
I think what has made it happen with cigarettes is the incessant scientific evidence that this is a harmful thing, and that as a consequence you are harming yourself, and now the new evidence that you are harming your family, your kids, your spouse, and so on. It has become the case that for the first time in our culture, people who smoke are being seen as weak. It used to be, it was a sign of bravado. Macho.
The Marlboro Man.
It still is the case. We had a visiting professor here from Czechoslovakia who said in her country, the idea of being a smoker is still seen as a sense of being devil-may-care and strong and macho. In this country, suddenly it's become a sign of weakness. And that is going to be the thing that's going to turn it around, I think.
So if we want to change our society, we need to marshal the media, really, because I think that's what it's also done. 20 years ago, television advertising for tobacco was consistent. But then one day, 20 years ago, we made that illegal, and they didn't have access to movie, or television rather, and music and motion to try and make us feel good. And instead what we see on television are all these ads against it and making those images real for people. So it's interesting to see what we can do with media, what we can do with a political decision to change literally the values and behaviors of an entire society.
Exactly right.
Let's talk about one or two others. I appreciate you taking the time between class. I want to make sure you get back on time. Scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the fear of scarcity, people do incredible things. Stock markets rise and fall. The situation that we have right now in the Middle East with oil. Out of scarcity, people do bizarre things. Let's talk about scarcity a little bit and how it impacts us.
Because we are more attracted to those things that are scarce, that are rare, that are dwindling in their availability, we try to seize those opportunities whenever they are there, even if they're not something we especially want in the first place. I had this situation of finding myself in an appliance store a few months ago, and I study this influence stuff. This is my life. This is my research project. Is my principal life study is influence, and I'm still a sucker for this stuff. I was in an appliance store, and I was kind of window shopping because I thought we might need an extra television for
so you made the first mistake.
Rooms.
You made a small commitment. You went to the store.
I went to the store, and I was looking at this one set. It was kind of interesting to me, but I didn't think it was a good enough deal for me to really want to spend my money on it right then. Well, the salesman came up to me, and he said, "Well, I see you're interested in this set at this price, and I can see why. That's a great deal. We've got it on sale right now, but I should tell you that it's the last one that we have in stock. And a woman just called to say she's on her way to come here to buy it."
And you believed him.
And I bought that set. 20 minutes later, I'm walking out of there with this television set in my arms and thinking, what just hit me? I just fell for the principle of scarcity again. I want the things I can't have.
So that's really what it is. We want the things we can't have.
Just because I can't have them.
Now, this also happens in relationships.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people understand the extent to which this works, and they will sometimes invent suitors for their attention other than the people they're really interested in, so it will appear that the person they're really interested in is in competition now for me, this scarce resource. There's
Right.
only one of me, and if you don't get me, somebody else will.
Right. Interesting. Now, there are some things that really are scarce, though. That's not being manipulated. There are only so many of them. There's only so much of it. How do you feel about our response to scarcity there? Is it appropriate?
I think it's not only appropriate, it's wise. I want to know when it is the case that something that I might have access to will not be available a little later on. That's a piece of information that I want to be able to bring into my system. And so anyone who's a true detective of influence, who wants to influence me in a positive way so that I have all of the information available, should not be so foolish as to forget to mention an existing state of scarcity that might exist for a house that I'm looking at to buy, or a car, a used car, or whatever it is. If there are other people who are interested in it,
Where
I
it's
want to
true.
know about where it's true, then I will be properly informed by that information, and I should take it into account to recognize, well, there are other people who think that this house at this price is a good deal, so
Because otherwise you may miss out,
I
and
might.
then you'd be mad, and you'd feel like you had pain later on. So,
Yeah.
again, it's intent here. Is somebody using this just to manipulate, or are they sharing something that's true that also may move you to action? Their
Right.
job is to move you to action.
Right.
You gave me an example at certification about a gentleman who did this description of scarcity about, I think it was beef. Is that correct, overseas?
Yeah.
Maybe you can share that example.
Yeah, this is a student of mine who came back to school after becoming a successful businessman. He owned a company that sold beef. He imported beef from South America, New Zealand, and Australia to the United States, and then he sold it to supermarket chains, large retailers, in carloads, train carloads. Well, he came back to school to get his degree in marketing, and he came into my office and he said, I want to do an experiment using my sales staff to do a research project on. So we began to review all of the evidence that suggested that people, number one, are more attracted to scarce resources, but number two, they are more influenced by information that is scarce,
Interesting.
by information that is exclusive, that not everybody has access to. So we decided we would do the following experiment.
You mean like power talk, right?
Like, that's right. Not everybody gets this.
That's right.
Only those who subscribe. Yes. So, he went to his sales staff. He said, take your list of customers, divide them randomly into thirds. For the first third of them, call them on the phone and give your standard sales appeal to sell a certain allotment of beef that we currently have available. And that went something like, we have a certain allotment of beef, it is of such and such a price, it is of such and such a quality, we can guarantee delivery by such and such a date. How many carloads would you like? That's the first group. A second group of customers got a call, they heard about the allotment of beef, and they were told, because of certain weather conditions in Australia, there will be a shortage of grain, and therefore a shortage of Australian beef in the near future. We have a certain allotment of beef. How much of it would you like to buy at this point? As a consequence, twice as much beef was purchased when people were told about an impending scarcity.
Again, they were told this before they were asked to order.
Yes.
Interesting.
Again, it's what you do first, right before you make the request, that's crucial.
Okay.
The third group was the most interesting to me. Not only were they told about this allotment of beef that was available, and that there was an impending shortage in Australia of imported beef, they were told, by the way, this information comes to our company from our exclusive sources in the Australian National Weather Service. No one else has this information. We think this is a good time to buy. How much beef would you like? 6 times as much beef were purchased under those circumstances than under the ordinary appeal condition. 6 times as much beef. And this man who did the study made a small fortune
doing his research.
And he came to me afterwards. He said, Dr. Cialdini, these conditions have existed before in the history of my company. We've known about impending shortages, and this information has come to us through our exclusive sources around the world, but we've never known to use it before. Now, when we look at the research and we look what it says about the implications for our behavior, when there is truly genuine scarcity there and the information is genuinely exclusive, engaging those principles of influence in a healthy way where everybody wins, because not only did the customers win, they got their beef at a price that was lower because they got it before the scarcity hit. The company won because they got 6 times as much beef being purchased. Everybody wins when you use these strategies like a detective would. You go in, you find what's truly there, you bring that stuff to the surface, win-win.
That's neat. Well, I think it comes down to knowing what people's real needs are, and then figuring out how can you meet those needs, and then saying, okay, what are all the principles of human psychology or social psychology that I can use to bear here so that I can have more impact? Right. We do that. We use a whole variety of things, both scarcity, and we also use, for example, a polling process and meeting business people. Because if you call a business person up and say, we're this company area, we'd like to come by and share with you how you can make your business more effective and how we can enhance the quality of life for all your people, it's like, yeah, sure, buddy. But what we do is we go out and we employ all these things. Because when I started studying these, I said, okay, we need to go out and give something and tell people, listen, we want to earn your respect. You don't know who we are from Adam. So I want to give you this book from the person who wrote it, and they're representing me, obviously, this book, Unlimited Power. And Tony Robbins is a national bestseller, Social Proof, Reciprocation. If you'd be willing to give me 10 minutes, I'd love to ask you some questions for research for his next book, which I legitimately get. And they ask him all these questions, and what we find out is what their real needs are. And we don't have a flashy man or woman coming in that they have to try to appeal to. And with that information, though, usually our people can say, we have some things in this area that could help you. Are you interested in finding out what they are? And great, why don't I come back another time and talk to you about that, because I'm busy right now. And they'll come back a week later and say, here's what we have. And we have a tremendous response. So I want our listeners, both those in business and those who are just involved in day-to-day life, to look at these as both as tools. Tools can be used to abuse people, or tools can be used to enhance the quality of life. And if they're used in a win-win way, I think we're able to reach more people and have more of an impact now than we ever did before I understood these principles.
Yeah, they're powerful tools. They're dynamite. In the same sense, dynamite can be used for good, or it can be used for ill, and it depends how you want to structure yourself. Do you want to be known as somebody who is a destroyer, who is a damager, who is a harm doer, or do you want to use these tools in ways that build infrastructure?
I agree. One of the things that you shared with me was that so many of us in life have been taught to be, I know I perceive myself and I know you perceive yourself as givers. We want to always give more than we take back. And we really strive for that. Part of that's a part of our self-esteem, I'm sure. But one of the things that often happens, I know in my past, is people would want to give back to me, and I wouldn't let them. I always had to pick up the check. Even when I was broke, I always wanted to take care of people. I always wanted to do those things. And one day I realized that I was being a taker by doing that. I was robbing someone else of the opportunity to give as well. And you come along, you do something great for somebody, and they come back and thank you and say, oh my gosh, thank you so much, What could I do for you? And most people's response is, oh, nothing, it was nothing. But you have a different response to that. What is that?
Yeah, it's, you don't dismiss what you've really done for somebody. You say, you'd do the same for me.
Now, why would you say that?
Because, number one, you want to put that person on record as recognizing, yes, you did receive something out of the ordinary. I did go out of my way to help you out, and you're the kind of person who plays by the rules so that when I need something, you'll be ready, willing, and able to help me out.
Versus saying, well, it was nothing, and then having the person think like you feel it was nothing. And a lot of people do that. They've given their heart and soul, and they busted their tail to try and help somebody, and they try to thank them, and I think it robs both parties. They don't get to feel the person's appreciation, and the other person starts thinking, well, maybe it is nothing, and then they take it for granted, and later on the person's upset. I do all these things for them, they don't even appreciate it.
Yeah, so you generate a sense of entitlement in people for the things that you really have gone out of your way to give them, and that's not good either, because then you never get anything back for the extra effort that you put forth.
And then you blame other people for that.
Right.
Interesting. I remember you saying that one of the reasons that commitment and consistency works so powerfully to control our behavior is that if I want to know who you are, Bob, I look at you and I judge you by your behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And I decide by all those behaviors, you're a good guy, you're a bad guy, you're an intelligent guy, you're not an intelligent guy, whatever it is. But I get that by how you act, how you behave, what I can see and hear and experience of you directly. But what most people don't realize is that we judge who we are by our own behaviors. So that sometimes what happens is somebody gets us to do something we don't put much thought in. Like wear that little button that says I support the Cancer Society, and we just do it just because we like the person, or we just do it because it's easy, or we just do it just to get it over with and move on. But then later on what happens is we look at that and ask ourselves, why did we do that? And we judge our own behavior and say, I'm doing that because, as you said, I'm a charitable person. The question I have for you is, what are some areas we could do this with our children to really impact their long-term life, their ultimate destiny?
Okay, I think what we've got to do, for example, is show them in ways that they can make small commitments show them the way to move in the directions we would like. For example, if we want our kids to be truthful and honest and so on, we have to make sure that they take those kinds of steps. We make it easy for them to be honest. We arrange circumstances so that they can move in those directions in ways that aren't difficult for them to do, so that they start seeing themselves as people who take the honest route whenever they get a chance. If we want them to be dedicated to an activity, to put in a lot of effort, we have to show them how to do it. And again, we don't want to give them an enormous task. We want to give them steps to take in which they can put in the effort and then take the next level up, put in the effort. Another thing we want to do is be able to give them examples in our own behavior of those things so that they can feel that this is the right way to move. I wrote a book, the book called Influence, and in the front of the book, it's dedicated to my son, Christopher.
Yeah,
Christopher. And by dedicating that book to Christopher, I did something that I thought was very important for me in making myself generate the best possible book that I could conceivably write.
That's admirable.
Here's the image that I allowed myself to have in the back of my mind when I wrote that book, and when I hesitated about spending another day in the library researching some of this stuff, or going out to yet another situation where I could research the professions of influence and so on, when I knew that would make the book a little bit better, just a little bit better, should I put in the effort? Here's the image. Chris doesn't live with me anymore. My wife and I are divorced, so he lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I don't see enough of him. He spends the summers with me and the Christmas breaks and so on. But I have the following image. I've written this book, and Chris is now an adult. He has a son, maybe 10 years old, 8, 9 years old, and he takes his son to a library somewhere in this country. It can be anywhere. It can be Washington, D.C., it could be Bangor, Maine, it could be Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And he finds a copy of my book on the shelf. And he takes it off the shelf, and he opens it up, and he shows his son, and he says, "See, your grandpa wrote this book for me. Now that better be a good book. It's worth making that the best possible book I can make it." Well, those are the kinds of things that we have to do to commit ourselves, to dedicate ourselves. We have to have images in our minds that we also transmit to our kids about how we prefer to live our lives, what is important for us, what are the dimensions and the values that we want them to share.
Well, I think it's true. First of all, I admire you for the deep feeling you have for your son and your commitment to him. I think it's true that for most human beings, one of the beautiful things about human beings is we'll do more for those we care about than we'll even do for ourselves. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but once you know it's true, taking advantage of it to make yourself a better person is pretty great. And I personally think that all of our lives are basically designed to be one of two things: examples or warnings. And you truly are an example. I appreciate your sharing these principles with us, and I hope people will take full advantage of them. What would be your vision of how you would like people to remember your work, and what impact you would like it to have long-term in society as a whole or for individuals?
Well, I count myself a scientist, a social scientist, and my colleagues typically engage themselves in the investigation of ideas, the generation and the investigation of ideas. I like that road as well. I'm fascinated by the scientific process. But there's another link to it that I think I would especially like to be known as, and that is a communicator of that information. I'm not just interested in playing mind games with myself, learning about things for my own benefit. I like the idea of generating, investigating, and communicating knowledge in a way that has an impact. And the other thing about the way I think I'd like to be known is that, scientists often talk about how they stand on the shoulders of giants. They stand on the shoulders of people who have gone before them,
yes,
who have thought about these issues, who have laid the groundwork that has allowed them to take the next step upwards. I think if I'd like to be known, I'd like to be known as a set of shoulders.
Oh, that's nice.
That someone was able to stand on to make the next step up.
Well, I've used your shoulders already myself, and I want to thank you for that. And I want to continue to grow with you through the years. I know Bob and I have talked about using some of these strategies to empower people in the inner city to change their entire belief about who they are and what they're capable of. And I think that these tools can be tools that are just not known in the, as you say, in the society of those in the ivory tower, but hopefully communicated in a way that not only gets people to understand them, but empowers them to act. And I hope those who've listened to this tape will sit down and say, that was not only fascinating stuff, but how can I use this? How can I use this today? How could I empower a relationship, have a better impact on my kids or on myself or on my spouse? How could I make my business more profitable and more ethical? How could I really use this stuff to expand who I am and the impact that my life eventually has? And I think you've certainly put it out there for people, and you put it out there with integrity, and it's something I deeply respect and look forward again to continue to learn and share more with you. Before we finish up, I do want to make sure people have a way to communicate to you directly if they want to get a hold of you to get to your book or your seminars. Do you have a number that you can offer?
Yeah, there's a number here in Arizona where people who are interested could call. That is area code 602-967-6070.
And if they call, you'll send them one of these wonderful cards of yours, right? That